Hi everyone, it's very nice to be here and to be part of this event and of this biennial. And following Anton's introduction, I will share now some ideas about the concept of Séance, a term that is actually central for our curatorial framework for the upcoming biennial. But before doing that, I also want to say thank you to Seoul Museum and the amazing curatorial team. That's really a pleasure to work with. Jin, Hanul, and Jin Yong. Thank you for working. It's a pleasure with us. And so starting from here, the Séance, Séance for us serves as both a metaphor and a method for organizing our curatorial research and working on the exhibition. It offers a framework to explore the intersections of mysticism, spirituality, and technology in contemporary artistic practices. Etymologically, séance in French translates to sitting or session, though its particular meanings have evolved over the past 2 centuries across cultural and intellectual frameworks. Originally, the term referred to spiritualist gatherings intended to summon spirits. Over time, in the last 200 years, it broadened to include other types of gatherings or sessions, specifically psychoanalytical and cinematic ones, that I will focus in the second part of my presentation. Whether summoning the dead, interpreting unconscious desires, or projecting images on screen for the film viewers, séance functions as a mediatory act, a process through which the absent is momentarily brought into the present, rendered perceptible, and opened to interpretation. In what follows, I will briefly consider how 3 aforementioned practices of séance provide optics that inform our research, considering a variety of artworks for the upcoming biennial. So let's start from the part 1. As Anton has already mentioned, attempts to bridge the realms of the living and the dead have deep roots in the history of humanity, appearing in the myths, rituals, and spiritual practices all the way back to the ancient civilizations. However, the modern concept of the spiritual séance emerged not so long time ago, in the mid-19th century, again briefly mentioned by Anton already. And it coincided with a period of technological, cultural, and social transformation that started in the Western world. Historians suggest that the rise of spiritualism, or spiritism as it is known in Europe, was in part a response to the anxieties and uncertainties of early modernity. This era of unprecedented scientific discovery created a need for metaphysical constructs, enabling society to reconcile an increasingly scientific and mechanistic worldview with enduring spiritual and existential questions. As the certainties of religious orthodoxy gave way to a more secular and rational perspectives, spiritualism emerged as a means of navigating these tensions. For many, séances, spiritual séances, became a way to revisit questions of the afterlife, transcendence, and the limits of human knowledge, questions that traditional religions struggled to address amidst the dramatic societal changes in Western society during that century. One of the foundational stories, you already saw this amazing women, of a spiritual movement in the United States centers on the Fox sisters, who in 1848 claimed to communicate with spirits through rapping sounds during seances held initially in their home and later in public and private venues. They became really active and popular spiritual mediums. Their story, with its dramatic rise to fame, public performances, and eventually controversy, which they themselves told that they were actually cheating, resembles the plot of a Hollywood movie and captivated the public imagination, remaining one of the most dramatic and widely discussed accounts for spiritualism's early days. However, they represent just one among many examples that fueled the rapid expansion of spiritualism into transatlantic phenomenon. The spiritualist movement spread across the United States and Europe, and later other continents as well, resonating deeply with intellectual and artistic circles. By the latter half of the 19th century, practices like table turning and other common seance rituals had turned communication with spirits into widespread cultural phenomenon. As Molly Magari, in her book Ghosts of Futures Past, Spiritualism and the Cultural Politics of 19th Century America writes, the cultural appeal of spiritualism was rooted in special factors of the time that was marked by high mortality rates and recent collective traumatic events, such as in America, the American Civil War, as well as recurring epidemics. That's why spiritual seances became spaces of mourning, offering bereaved families a means of maintaining symbolic connections with their lost loved ones. Moreover, and also very important, as industrialization reshaped daily life and Darwinian evolutionary theory challenged established religious beliefs, spiritualism opened new avenues for exploring questions of the limits of human understanding. The improvisational and participatory format of seances, and you can see here on screen, there were like many different ways of doing it, but here you see the table turning ritual when people sit around the table with hands put down, and at some point table starts moving, spirit starts moving the table, although of course later on it was explained that there are like some physics behind it, but this kind of almost sometimes playful setup also opened new avenues for different communal constellations. Seances lent feminist and political undertones too, making this practice sometimes more than just spiritual practice. And here we could remember what Anton mentioned in the first part about the Fox sisters affiliation with Quakers movement, and generally it would be a different and very interesting venue to take to think about the connection between spiritualism and socialism at that time. But in a different conversation, not today. In her monograph, The Darkened Room, Women, Power and Spiritualism in Late Victorian England, Alex Owen describes spiritualism as an effort to reconcile the empirical demands of rapidly developing science with the need for certain metaphysical answers that have not disappeared in times of the early modernity. Therefore, it should not be surprising that spiritualists often frame seance as an act that mirrors scientific experimentation in its methodological repetition and systematic structure, seeking to validate their practices within a rationalist framework. For this reason, they actively embraced emerging technologies, positioning themselves at the intersection of mysticism and modernity. As Geoffrey Scones explores in his book Haunted Media, the telegraph, often referred to at that time as talking wire, became a key metaphor for spiritualist mediums, people who would mediate with the spirits, often drawing parallels between technological functioning of a telegraph and their own capacity to connect the living with the dead. And as you can see on this slide, it's a real story, a true story that a Spiritualist Association in 1854 actually wrote a letter petition to the US Congress to develop spiritual telegraph based on the project of real telegraph that could connect heaven and earth. The advent of spirit photography, popularized by figures such as William Mulmler, with its uncanny qualities of early photographic techniques, including long exposures and double exposures, was also used as a scientific evidence validating spiritualism's metaphysical claims. These photographs, as one you can see now on the screen, which purportedly captured images of spirits alongside living subjects, were hailed by many mediums as scientific evidence validating their practice. As Tom Gunning argues in his work on spirit photography of the 19th century, these images functioned both as cultural artifacts and as objects of belief, blurring the boundaries between evidence and imagination. The spirituals' attempt to adapt the tools of technological modernity alludes to broader epistemological shifts of the era. when science and technology did not only substantiate spiritual practices, but also framed them as a continuation of older metaphysical traditions and simultaneously a distinctly modern phenomenon. This attempt to not only bridge the living and the dead, but also reconcile the scientific knowledge that was obviously closely tied with the new industrial capitalist life, with the psychological state of a society, makes the spiritual seance a productive framework to think about other practices of seance, such as psychoanalysis and cinema. And even later on, in the 20th century, other practices to expand one's consciousness, such as psychedelic movement and etc. That all keep finding new forms of mediation to respond to the new realities of a capitalist society. The development of psychoanalysis in the late 19th century and early 20th century allows us to discuss the seance as an inward turning process, mediating between the conscious and unconscious. Not unlike spiritualism, early psychoanalysis was embedded in a cultural moment that saw a proliferation of interest in non-rational forces, from electromagnetic waves to psychic phenomena. However, while the spiritual seance sought to summon otherwise ineffable spirits, the psychoanalytical seance is structured practice for engaging with the hidden forces of the psyche through a scientific method. To put it a little speculatively, in the psychoanalytical seance, the external spirits are replaced with the internal ghosts of the unconsciousness. In the interpretation of dreams in 1900, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, described dreams as the royal road to the unconsciousness, their fragmented imagery encoding forbidden desires and unprocessed traumas. Freud's development of interpretation of dreams and later free association could be seen as methods to summon repressed material, with the analyst serving as a modern medium who interprets symbolic residues, silences, and interruptions in the patient's otherwise ineffable parts of the mind. Central to the psychoanalytical seance is the concept of transference, in which the patient projects unconscious feelings onto the analyst. This projection creates a dynamic of double mediation where the analyst must navigate both the patient's symbolic material and their own interpretative presence. Jacques Lacan has famously expanded on Freud's insights of free interpretation by reframing the unconsciousness as a structure like a language that organizes the absent and the unspoken. Lacan's concept of the real, which resists representation but exerts a disruptive force on the symbolic order, strengthens this idea of psychoanalytical seance as a kind of modern ritual. Like the spiritual seance's spirits, the real cannot be articulated, according to Lacan, within the rational and the symbolic, but makes itself present in the moments of rupture through mediation. But what about the cinematic seance? What does it have in common with spiritual and psychoanalytical seances, despite all three of them emerging historically around the same time, during the late 19th century and early 20th century, amid significant technological advancements in projection and recording?
Tout ça, c'est une... Aujourd'hui, ça doit se traiter, me semble-t-il, dans un échange entre l'art du cinéma, dans ce qu'il a de plus inouï, de plus inédit finalement, et quelque chose de la psychanalyse. Je crois que cinéma plus psychanalyse égale science du fantôme. Vous savez, Freud, toute sa vie, a eu affaire au problème du fantôme. Tout le développement de la technologie des télécommunications, au lieu de restreindre l'espace des fantômes, comme on pourrait le penser. On pourrait penser que la science, aujourd'hui, la technique, laisse derrière eux l'époque des fantômes, qui était l'époque des manoirs, d'une certaine technologie de fruste, enfin d'une certaine époque périmée, alors que je crois au contraire que que l'avenir est au fantôme et que la technologie moderne de l'image, de la cinématographie, de la télécommunication décuple le pouvoir des fantômes, le retour des fantômes.
In this clip from Ghost Dance, a film by Ken McMullen made in 1983, famous French philosopher Jacques Derrida offers a provocative formula: cinema plus psychoanalysis equals a science of ghosts. This Derrida's famous statement perfectly underscores the structural parallels between film and psychoanalysis, especially their shared engagement with memory through mechanism of projection. Both practices activate something absent, neither here nor now, making the intangible momentarily present. As Derrida further noted in his 1982 interview with Cahiers du Cinéma journal, seances, whether spiritual, cinematic, or psychoanalytical, grapple with the uncanny, unheimlich, as Freud defined it. The unsettling return of repressed material informs both familiar and strange. In what follows, in that article, Derrida describes film as a medium uniquely attuned to preserve traces of the past while animating them in the present, creating an uncanny temporality where the dead can appear more alive than the living. This is central to both psychoanalytical seance and the cinematic seance, where images from the past or fictional constructs are reanimated, producing an unsettling interplay between reality and imagination. Thus, cinematic seance, through its acts of projection and mediation, can be understood not only as a spiritual seance's modern technological iteration, where in the darkened theater viewers engage in a ritualized encounter with light, shadow, and sound, and where ephemeral images conjure presence from absence. At the same time, cinematic seance evokes the qualities of psychoanalytical seance, establishing a space where the conscious and unconscious converge. Crucially, Derrida emphasizes that cinematic seance is not solely about the projection of the images onto a screen. It also involves the audience's projections onto the film itself, creating a reciprocal dynamic akin to the psychoanalytical process of transference. Watching a film, then, becomes a mediated encounter of double projection. Viewers confront not only the images on screen, but also the unconscious forces they bring themselves to the experience. Derrida even jokingly refers, in the end of the article for Cahiers du Cinéma, to the cinematic seance as more economical alternative to psychoanalytical one, basically suggesting that the film ticket is cheaper compared to cost of psychoanalytical seance. Again, Derrida, of course, is by no means the only reference worth revisiting here. Cinema's structural similarity to psychoanalysis was further contextualized, and even before Derrida as well, through ideas of many scholars, philosophers, and film theorists. Here I wanted to point to Edgar Morin and Christian Metz. Christian Metz famously described how cinema creates, and I quote, double consciousness in its audience, spectators simultaneously recognizing the artifice of the image and immersing themselves into its imaginative world. This duality, according to Metz, mirrors the psychoanalytical process where symbolic projections allow repressed material to emerge while maintaining a critical distance. As you see, it's a bit similar argument when Derrida's one. Edgar Morin, who was also a filmmaker and ethnographer at the same time as a cultural critic and philosopher, writes that cinema is a mirror machine, and in a way complements Metz's insights, emphasizing how cinema produces a dialectical unity of the real and unreal. For Morin, cinema allows spectators to engage with doubles that are both familiar and strange, satisfying the human need to confront mirror, projections of the self and the world. The spectator's absence from the screen, according to Morin, creates a space for imaginative engagement, where projected images become sites for negotiating fears, desires, and unresolved psychic tensions, not unlike in the early spiritual seances. However, Victor Tausk's concept of the influencing machine brings an even sharper focus to the critical, and I wanted to point to critical here, intersection between cinematic and psychoanalytical séance. Tausk, the student of Freud and an analyst himself, in his most important essay on the origin of the influencing machine in schizophrenia, which he wrote in 1919 and then committed suicide very shortly after it, and which was first published in 1933 only. In that essay, he describes how his patients suffering from schizophrenia often externalize their physic fragmentations through imagined machines, taking control of their body that often resemble cinematic technologies, such as magic lanterns or early cinematographs. These influencing machines, complex assemblages of wires, batteries, and cranks, produce uncanny images on single planes, again, mirroring the mechanics of early cinema. It's all based on Tausk's notes from communication with his patients. Tausk's concept illuminates the unconscious dimensions of projection, linking the filmic seance, again, to the psychoanalytical seances focus on mediating encounters with repressed material. While his work is specific to clinical pathology, its resonance with cinematic experiences highlights the shared logic of projection and the interplay between external apparatuses and internal psychic realities. The influencing machine also reflects the broader cultural anxieties of modernity, where technological advancements increasingly blurred the boundaries between human subjectivity and external mechanisms. Tausk noted that his patients' descriptions of a machine often mirrored their own fragmented self-images, suggesting that the device was not merely a delusional construct, but a symbolic articulation of deeper psychic and cultural ruptures. The machine, in Tausk's words, is a product, and I quote here, is a product of a patient's own psychic life, projected outward and transformed into a concrete object. This is particularly interesting in thinking about the context of a cinematic seance. And we could all think about our experiences in film. The cinematograph, like the influencing machine, mediates between absence and presence, creating a space where fragmented images are assembled into coherent narratives, or conversely, where coherence disintegrates into spectral fragments. Tausk's work thus not only illuminates the psychic dimensions of modern technology, but also reveals cinema as a medium uniquely positioned to respond to the tensions between fragmentation and mediation of a modern psyche. And before concluding, I want to refer to one more very important text by a prominent person in theory of psychoanalysis, Freud's very close friend, Hans Sachs, who is known for his response to posthumously published Tausk's essay I was talking about. He actually extended Tausk's ideas in this response by reflecting on the estrangement that modern machines introduced into human life. Sachs noted that technological contraptions like the mechanical loom and the steam hammer replace human labor while simultaneously alienating individuals from the processes they once controlled. He observed that these devices designed to serve humanity often assumed a dominant position, reconfiguring their operators into automatons. This reversal, Sachs argued, resonated with the paranoid delusions of the schizophrenic patients who perceived the influencing machine not merely as an external object, but as an invasive force undermining their autonomy. Sachs' insights shed light on how the influencing machine operates as a metaphor for broader cultural anxieties about modernity and industrial capitalism. His suggestion that the machine's dual function, both controlling and being controlled, mirrors the psychic fragmentation experienced in the face of technological innovation. This interplay is similar to the cinematic apparatus, which demands, again, both passive spectatorship and active psychic engagement from its audience. The audience, like the patient of an influencing machine, is simultaneously subjected to the machine's effects and drawn into its operations. By situating the idea of Tao's influencing machine within the larger historical and cultural context of what Sachs calls machine age, we can underscore its relevance not only to psychoanalytical theory, but also to the technological imaginaries of the modern era. Sachs' reflections deepen Tao's original observations, emphasizing how the machine's uncanny operations symbolize the psychic and cultural dislocations brought about by industrialization and mechanization. That actually continues to echo in today's post-industrial capitalist era, and which my dear colleague Hallie Ayres will discuss in the following presentations after the screening of a few short films that I will present now. So we will actually decided to screen 3 films for you following my talk, and films actually resonate with what I was talking in many ways. One could say that they're also talk to the idea of psychoanalytical, cinematic, and spiritual seance. And we will start from showing Ritual in Transfigured Time, a classic film by Maya Deren, made in 1946. It's a 15 minutes long film, which actually presents something that Maya Deren was pursuing throughout her career, the connection between body, dance, and a ritual performed in front of a camera. And in this film, Deren actually directed, wrote, and played in the film herself. And she utilized, historically at that time, innovative editing techniques such as slow motion and freeze frames to create a dreamlike narrative structure. So one could say that the film in a way functions as a cinematic seance, mediating between something that is invisible and ineffable and the very tangible bodily presence, but also it could be approached as something that an act that through the film form tries to transform the viewer. And then after Maya Deren's film, we'll watch the film titled Samadhi by Jordan Belson, that was made in 1967. It's 6 minutes long only. And some of you might know that Jordan Belson is a really known abstract experimental filmmaker who was really inspired by Eastern spiritual practices. And in this film, the title refers to Samadhi, a state of meditative consciousness known in Buddhism. And the film employs colors and dynamic forms to evoke transcendental experience, aiming to represent of movement of consciousness, as the director said. What also may be nice to note that Jordan Belson is really known for creating stunning visual effects, and at that time where he didn't work with the computers, it was all achieved through analog techniques, which he developed over decades, including hand painting on film, using multiple projectors, lenses, lighting setups, creating this like really cosmic imagery. And the third film, we will finish this short film program, is a title Looking for Mushrooms, and directed by Bruce Conner. Actually, the film's production year is a bit complicated because he was making this film for 8 years, from 59 to 67. But then he decided at that time to have a very short cut, and in 1996 he expanded it to 14 minutes long, which we will watch now. And Bruce Conner, some of you might know, is also like a legendary figure in the American experimental film of the 20th century, and who was at that time, as many other people around, exploring the effects of psychedelics. And the film was shot in Mexico between 1961 and as I said, 1959 and 1967. And in this film, he presents a psychedelic journey through different landscapes, villages, and religious iconography. It also illustrates the explorations of psychedelics that could be thought through or aligned with idea of a seance as a means to access hidden or transcendental realms. So enjoy the films and thank you so much.